Hi. I wanted to do an intro for you to The Scholars, which is a novel that's actually was written a long time after the period we're usually studying, so I'm cheating by giving you this. But the reason I wanted to give it to you was because it seemed like such a great snapshot of Chinese culture, including Chinese culture that goes back a long, long way. You'll already have read about Confucius, the section about Confucius, and I'll give you a quiz on that too. I didn't do an intro on that because that's again a modern person talking to us about this ancient text, and it's not a primary source. It's not the words of Confucius himself. It's a modern person talking about Confucius. So these intros are really to help you deal with primary sources. Um, but one thing to notice, what the way in which the scholars kind of is continuous with Confucius, and I'm sure we'll have talked about this in class, is that China has a unique relationship to scholarship. It's the only culture I know of that has a god of learning, not just a god of wisdom. The Greeks had a god of wisdom, the Romans had a god of wisdom, lots of people have gods of wisdom, but gods of learning, of scholarship. And that Confucius, I mean, he never claimed to be a god, and I think most Chinese, if you pressed him, would say, oh, no, it's not that he's a god exactly. But there were statues that people would bring offerings to just before their kid has to take some high stakes exams, because he's the god of, he's a sort of godlike figure in relationship to learning and scholarship. And that is something unique about Chinese culture, that reverence, not just for wisdom, because that can mean a lot of things. That might not have anything to do with books. Scholarship has to do with books. And that it tells you something. The Chinese put this value so high. They rate it so highly. The only other culture I know of that has a similar value system in that area is traditional Judaism. In traditional Judaism, studying the Torah and the commentaries on the Torah were a religious duty. And so enormous prestige was given to scholars in the Jewish tradition and also in the Chinese tradition, boy. And so the centrality of Confucius as a cultural figure kind of shows that, I think. Now, with the scholars, I want to show you the other side of it, because part of this, a unique thing that the Chinese did, was they tried to run their government with scholars who took exams and did really, 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 really well on the exams, incredibly difficult exams. The and the examination system goes back thousands of years in China. And this was how you made your way into a civil service job, a government job. And those were the jobs everybody wanted. There was, so you would take these exams, which include things like writing poems or offering commentaries on classic texts. It's as if the way to become politically powerful in the United States would be to write sonnets and to memorize lots of Shakespeare. Okay, and why people thought that was who you wanted running your country is an interesting question. I mean, most of you will be thinking that, what does that have to do with anything? I mean, okay, you like Shakespeare, great, but why should I put you in charge of the Department of Transportation? But the Chinese civil service was staffed by people who did extremely well on exams, and said the scholars is about that class of people who have traditionally been a very important class of people because they ran the government. And the very highest up ones got to run be in the palace next to the emperor, and then lower down at the provincial levels, there's a whole hierarchy depending on how well you did on your exams. So this exam thing is still huge in China today. I might end up showing you a video if I can find a good one. That when Chinese teenagers take college entrance exams, so the equivalent of the ACTs or the SATs, traffic is blocked off for blocks around because they don't want noise disturbing the scholars. And parents will wait outside the fences around the schools, around the testing centers. Well, they'll throng there waiting for their children to come out after their tests. It's quite a sight. Because these exams were the way to rise out of the peasantry, the way to come up in the world, if you weren't born into a prominent family. And the exams were incredibly competitive. Something like 1 out of 3,300 people who took the exam passed the exam. It depends. It was different at different eras. But if you're talking about the time that the novel, The Scholars, is set, I think the number was something like 1 out of 3,300, which is much worse odds, say, than people applying to Harvard. Getting into Harvard is a breeze compared to passing these exams. All right, so it gives you some sense. And what you'll see in The Scholars is people who struggle to pass these exams. You might send a son in your family to school for a long time because all of the family's hopes are on him, that he's the brilliant one, and he will make the fortunes of the family if he can pass these exams. Now, you might say make the fortunes of the family through a civil service job. That might strike some alarm bells because it's like, why do these guys expect to get rich from a government job? And that brings up the issue of corruption, and I think there was a lot of traditional corruption. Or maybe they didn't think it was corruption, but there was a lot of money to be made out of a government job, and that was part of the tradition as well. But the way to wealth and status was by way of the exams. Probably not the only way, but a big way, a major way. And this novel that you're reading an excerpt from is about people who are trying to climb that greasy pole, who are trying to climb that ladder, and about what it's like when you can't climb it, when you almost climb it, when you keep slipping to the bottom. And I wanted you to see how the Chinese thought about the exams, because the people who passed the exams, in a bunch of ways, ran the country for thousands of years.